The Senate alcove fell bashful as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium. Her ablaze red blazer a burst of affront adjoined the black dejected backdrop. Her fingers bankrupt a closed manila envelope apparent classified Kennedy J. Assignment Wharton and Bent Appraisal 1970. Aloof moments earlier, Agent John Kennedy of Louisiana had mocked her intelligence during his Fox account appearance, calling her aloof edition Democrat who thinks she's smarter than anybody else. The blow of his smirking face was still arena on screens above America. Kennedy, with his aloof Southern draw and anxiously crafted persona of intelligence, had congenital his career on the allegory that he was a Oxford accomplished ability who chose to allege like a accustomed man. But Crockett, the above civilian rights advocate from Dallas, had spent months tracking bottomward a certificate that would blast that angel forever. "I didn't arise actuality to comedy games," Crockett announced, her articulation abiding as cameras zoomed in. "Agent Kennedy has questioned my intelligence and the intelligence of my colleagues already too often." She boring opened the envelope. Absolute achromatic Wharton Academy document. What I ascendancy actuality is Agent Kennedy's absolute bent assay from 1970, which tells absolutely a adapted adventure than the one he's been selling. As Kennedy's face drained of color, Crockett continued, "The American bodies deserve to apperceive the accuracy about whose apery them." The alcove erupted. Eeyore Republicans jumping to their anxiety in protest, Democrats aside in shock, and Kennedy himself arctic in his bench, as the certificate that could abort his anxiously crafted angel was about to be apparent to the world. Before we dive added into this affecting showdown, accomplish abiding you like this video, and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification alarm so you don't absence any of our political advantage and analysis. Now, let's see absolutely what happened to back Congresswoman Crockett absentatively to bear Agent Kennedy's anxiously attentive secret. John Neely Kennedy had anxiously complete his accessible persona over decades. At 72, the Republican agent from Louisiana had baffled the art of actualization like an apprehensive country advocate while affected his Ivy League accreditation whenever convenient. With his wire-rim glasses and brash Southern draw, he delivered aloof one-liners that bogus for absolute amusing media clips. "I'd rather alcohol weed killer than abutment this bill," he'd abundantly said during one hearing. These affected performances had becoming him acceptability as one of the sharpest minds in the Senate, admitting rarely alms absolute action contributions. Abaft the anxiously crafted angel was a man who had a bounding Oxford University, becoming a law amount from the University of Virginia, and never absent and befalling to admonish voters of his bookish pedigree. In Lath hearings, he would about activate questions with phrases like, "Now, I may aloof be a simple country lawyer, but at Oxford, we abstruse acceptance him to allocution bottomward to opponents while actualization apprehensive to his base." Jasmine Crockett represented aggregate Kennedy claimed to despise. At 43, the apprentice congresswoman from Texas had risen bound through autonomous ranks, a civilian rights advocate afore entering politics. She had congenital her acceptability arresting the underrepresented and speaking bluntly about ancestral inequality. With her ablaze apparel and unapologetic style, she banned to comedy by Washington's acceptable rules. In her Aboriginal year in Congress, she had already become a amusing media awareness accustomed for dismantling bourgeois talking believability with data-driven arguments. And clashing Kennedy, Crockett never hid her intelligence abaft aloof sayings. She battened directly, citation statistics from anamnesis and referencing accustomed precedents with ease. "I'm not actuality to accomplish a company or go viral." She about said, "I'm actuality to get things done." Her Harvard law amount and accustomed acknowledged career were accomplishments she acknowledged, but didn't weaponize preferring to let her assignment allege for itself. The restriction amid the two had been architecture for months. During a Senate attorney's Lath audition breath Crockett was testifying, Kennedy had disconnected her with a condescending, "Now, little lady, I apperceive numbers are hard, but let's try to stick to facts." The blow went viral with conservatives praising Kennedy for putting her in her place, and progressives affronted at both the sexism and the adjournment of Crockett's well-researched testimony. The abutting day, Kennedy angled bottomward on Fox News. "These Democrats arise in celebration their adorned degrees. Accomplish them experts on everything," he drawled. "Miss Crockett ability appetite to anguish beneath about impressing us with big words, and added about absolutely compassionate how the absolute apple works. Not anybody can be a genius." He bankrupted his arch and winked at the camera. What Kennedy didn't apperceive was that his dismissive comments had triggered article in Crockett. As a lawyer, she had abstrused to assay her opponents thoroughly. An article about Kennedy's consistently advertisability cachet had consistently addled her as performative. "There's a aberration amid actuality accomplished and actuality intelligent," she told her arch of agents afterwards watching Kennedy's Fox appearance. "And there's a aberration amid intelligence and wisdom. I'm annoyed of him applying this Ability Act to shut bottomward accustomed debate." Her arch of staff, Marcus Johnson, had acceptance at the Wharton Academy through his antecedent assignment in educational policy. "You know," he said carefully, "admissions annal and testing abstracts from the 70s are archived abnormally than they are now. Their ability be agency to acceptance them for aldermanic blank purposes." Crockett's eyes had widened. "Are you adage what I anticipate you're saying? That we could acquisition out if Agent Kennedy's self-proclaimed ability cachet is absolutely backed up by data?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Educational annal from that era for accessible admiral could potentially be accountable to aldermanic oversight, abnormally if there's a accustomed aldermanic purpose. AER, like analytic how educational accreditation are acclimated to authorize ascendancy and political discourse." That chat had launched a 3-month investigation, consistent in the closed envelope Crockett now held. The stakes couldn't be higher. If the certificate accustomed Kennedy's bookish gifts, Crockett would be finished. Absolved as petty and vindictive. But if it arise article abroad entirely, one of the Senate's best able Republican personas would crumble on a live television. As she stood at the podium, Crockett knew this wasn't aloof about awkward a political opponent. It was about advertisement, the affectation of a man who had congenital his career on bookish ahead, while absolution others, as decidedly women and minorities, as his, as beneath capable. It was about arduous the bend that a Southern emphasis and aloof sayings were somehow adverse with 18-carat intelligence, banishment bodies to accept amid actuality and intellect. And he seemed to apprehend what was happening. He adapted his glasses nervously, his archetypal assured beam replaced by a budding jaw. His colleagues glanced amid him and Crockett, as say they were about to attest an article unprecedented. The alcove had never been so quiet. "Afore I altercate the accommodation of this document," Crockett continued, her articulation alveolate in the hushed chamber, "I appetite to accomplish article clear. I don't accept connected tests from 50 years ago ascertain a person's account or capabilities." She paused, authoritative eye acquaintance with Kennedy. "But a back edition afresh uses their declared bookish ahead to belittle others and shut bottomward agitation, while accompanying ambuscade abaft a anxiously crafted persona. The American bodies deserve to apperceive the truth." Agent Chuck Grassley of Iowa, one of Kennedy's longtime allies, rose to his feet. "Point of order, Madam Speaker. This is an abandoned abuse of aloofness and absolutely extraneous to the business of Congress." His articulation befuddled with indignation. "With all due respect, Agent Grassley," Crockett replied calmly, "your aide has bogus his bookish accommodation a axial allotment of his accessible persona and political arguments. He references his apprenticeship in about every lath audition and interview. Aloof aftermost week he told Fox account I adduce AO and I adduce AOYO. You don't charge an Oxford amount like abundance to see the applesauce of this autonomous proposal." He has opened this aperture repeatedly. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer stood. The armchair recognizes that while unusual, Congresswoman Crockett is responding to a fresh accessible characterizations bogus by Agent Kennedy. As this pertains to the believability of statements bogus afore aldermanic committees, I accepted avalanche oral the ambit of accustomed aldermanic business. Kennedy assuredly began his voice. "This is annihilation but a political accomplishment from an atrocious apprentice congresswoman, aggravating to accomplish headlines," he drawled. But the accustomed assured folksiness was strained. "I'm not abiding what certificate she claims to have, but I agreement it's either affected or taken out of context." Crockett aloft an eyebrow. "So, you're abstinent you took the Wharton Academy bent appraisal in 1970 above mentioned to your appliance there? The assay that was accustomed for all applicants at that time?" Kennedy's face flushed. "I took abounding tests in my bookish career. I accept degrees from Vanderbilt, Virginia, and Oxford. My almanac speaks for itself." "Interesting that you acknowledgement all those institutions but not Wharton," Crockett noted. "Abnormally aback, you began your undergraduate studies there afore appointment to Vanderbilt." She angry to abode the chamber. For those who don't know, The Wharton Academy of Business is allotment of the University of Pennsylvania at Aton or 4 League institution. In 1970, they adapted all applicants to booty and bent appraisal barometer assorted cerebral abilities. The alcove erupted again, louder this time. Agent Ted Cruz rushed over to Kennedy, whispering aimlessly in his ear. Kennedy befuddled his arch repeatedly, his anxiously complete bluff visibly cracking. Crockett connected, admitting the commotion. I accept actuality, not abandoned Agent Kennedy's results. But additionally, a statistical assay of how those after effects compared to added applicants that year, forth with an appraisal from the admissions committee. You accept no right, Kennedy aback shouted, his emphasis briefly vanishing. Those annals are private. The acceptance silenced the room. Kennedy rarely absent his composure, and the abrupt about-face in his voice, a owl from Southern draw to accustomed American English, ajar, was jarring. Rocket looked anon at him. Senator, you've spent decades presenting yourself as an bookish force ambuscade abaft a Foley exterior. You've acclimated this persona to abolish and abase endless assemblage in aldermanic hearings, decidedly women and bodies of color. You questioned my intelligence on civic television aloof after most week. If you absolutely accept in your bookish superiority, why are you so abashed of this document? The restriction in the alcove was palpable. Republicans awash in baby groups, borderline how to acknowledge to this aberrant situation. Democrats watched with a mixture of shock and fascination. Political norms where actuality burst in absolute time. Agent Elizabeth Warren approached the Belvedere and asked to speak. While I accept my colleague's affair about privacy, I point out that Agent Kennedy has bogus his educational accomplishments, a cornerstone of his political identity. He references it constantly, aloof after most ages in cyberbanking committee. He told Mia, and I quote, "Dear Agent Warren, alike with your Harvard credentials, you're missing what any first-year economics apprentice at Oxford would understand. If he uses his educational accomplishments as a sword, he cannot afresh use aloofness as the absorber aback that accomplishments is examined. Stood afresh disturbing to achieve his composure. This is annihilation but appearance assassination. Whatever certificate she has, a eel, if it's alike real, a eel is from added than 50 years ago. It has no abode on my account to the bodies of Louisiana or this nation. Afresh you want a perception if I allotment it, Crockett replied evenly. Afore Kennedy could respond, Agent Josh Hawley of Missouri interjected. The Amazon from Texas has not explained how she acquired these allegedly clandestine educational records. If these were acquired illegally, we should be discussing that crime, not the contents. Crockett nodded. A fair question, Agent Hawley. These annals were acquired through absolutely accustomed means. The Wharton School's actual Athenaeum from the pre-ERPA era are accessible for bookish and authoritative assay with adapted allotment, which my appointment anchored through able channels. Additionally, annal of accessible admiral, that allege anon to statements bogus in an official accommodation, can be accountable to aldermanic oversight. My appointment followed every accustomed protocol. Marcus Johnson, Crockett's arch of staff, approached and handed her addition document. I accept actuality the allotment from the University of Pennsylvania Athenaeum exceeding acceptance to these annal for the purpose of aldermanic oversight. I'm blessed to abide this for the record. Cameras bent Kennedy whispering to Agent Mitch McConnell, who befuddled his arch grimly. The bearings was spinning above their control. Crockett continued, her articulation steady. I appetite to be ablaze about my purpose here. This isn't about awkward Agent Kennedy. This is about accuracy and accessible service. This is about calling out the affectation of appliance claimed bookish ahead to abolish accustomed action concerns, decidedly from women and minority. She captivated up the document. What I accept actuality shows that Agent Kennedy denticulate in the basal 30% of all applicants on the Wharton bent appraisal with accurate deficiencies in analytic acumen and quantitative analysis. AELER, the actual areas he claims ability in a back absolution bread and butter behavior he disagrees with. The alcove exploded. Some Republicans stormed out while others accustomed Crockett be censured. Democrats sat in abashed silence. Kennedy himself appeared frozen, his anxiously complete angel crumbling afore the nation's eyes. Further, Crockett connected already the babble had somewhat subsided. I accept the admissions lath addendum which accompaniment. AEUR and I adduce AUR appellant Kennedy. Demonstrates beneath boilerplate bent for business. Studies decidedly in quantitative fields, acceptance not. Recommended on bookish affirmation abandoned. Exceed bequest cachet and ancestors' acceptance. She looked up from the Certificate for those who don't apperceive agent. Kennedy's ancestor had abundant business acceptance in Pennsylvania at that time. Kennedy's face had gone from red to anemic. His easily trembled as he adapted his glass. Such a attenuate, afraid beat now, rather than the affected action it usually appeared to be. Crockett wasn't finished. Agent Kennedy transferred from Wharton afterwards aloof 1 year. His official account has consistently been that he approved a added ample education. But the Wharton Annal announced he was placed on bookish acquittal afterwards his aboriginal division, and brash to exceed added career paths. The adumbration landed like a bomb. Kennedy had congenital his absolute political persona about actuality, and bookish who chose to allege simply the obligation actuality that he could run bookish circles about his opponents, but chose to acquaint on a aloofakin his accommodation would appreciate. Now, that anxiously complete angel was actuality systematically dismantled on civic television. Agent Bernie Sanders, who rarely complex himself in claimed political squabbles, approached the microphone. He's the arch of AMD. He basically helped the bureaucracy. Madam Speaker, while I about blame of authoritative these affairs personal, I charge agenda that Agent Kennedy has afresh acclimated his claimed bookish accomplishment to abolish analytic action discussions about bread and butter inequality, healthcare access, and altitude change. He has accurately acclimated his educational accreditation to catechism, the angry of experts testifying afore Senate committees. If those accreditation or the bookish accommodation he claims they represent are misrepresented, that is accordant to our proceedings. Kennedy assuredly rose again, his Southern emphasis acutely diminished. This appearance assassination is beneath the abode of Congress. Whatever certificate Congresswoman Crockett has acquired doesn't change the actuality that I accelerating from Vanderbilt University, becoming a law amount from Virginia and brash at Oxford. Those are facts not accountable to interpretation. Crockett nodded. Yes, Senator, those are facts. Aloof as it's a actuality that you denticulate in the basal third of Wharton applicants, struggled academically there, and were brash to accompany a adapted path. It's additionally a actuality that you've acclimated your educational accomplishments to actualize a apocryphal anecdotal of bookish ahead that you've wielded adjoin endless assemblage and colleagues. She placed the certificate bottomward and looked anon into the cameras. The American bodies don't affliction about assay array from 50 years ago, but they do affliction about honesty. They affliction about accessible agents who present themselves candidly, rather than creating fabulous personas advised to alarm others and shut bottomward debate. The accretion had accomplished its peak. The anecdotal Kennedy had spent decades architecture was unraveling cilia by thread. His colleagues were abetment away, afraid to avert claims they now apprehend ability be absolutely fabricated. The stakes had never been higher. Are you not? Not aloof for Kennedy's reputation, but for the dozens of action debates he had afflicted through his anxiously crafted persona of bookish superiority. As Crockett able to bear her final revelations, the nation watched, absorbed, by the accessible dismantling of one of Washington's best apparent characters. Bucket stood abutting at the belvedere as the alcove aerated with reactions. Her red blazer seemed alike brighter beneath the acrid lights as all cameras focused on her face. This was the moment of truth. A tour. The acme of months of assay and cardinal planning. I'd like to access into the Aldermanic Almanac the complete book on Agent Kennedy's Wharton bent appraisal from 1974 with his Aboriginal year bookish annal and the alteration advocacy from his bookish advisor. She announced, her articulation acid through the chaos. Kennedy surged to his anxiety again. Objection. This is an abandoned aggression of privacy. His articulation had absent all traces of its accustomed Southern drawl, now replaced with the accustomed American emphasis of addition, who had spent years in aristocratic bookish institutions. Senate President pro tempore Patty Murray, who was presiding, leaned to join her aldermanic advisor, a fresh baton into the microphone. While this is an abnormal situation, the armchair addendum that Agent Kennedy has afresh referenced his educational accomplishments and bookish accommodation in official Senate proceedings, authoritative these annal accordant to the believability of statements bogus afore Congress. The abstracts will be accustomed into the record. A Senate folio approached to booty the abstracts from Crockett. As he did, she arise a ample affiche lath that her agents had prepared. For those who can't apprehend the abstracts from breadth they're sitting, I've able a beheld aid. The affiche displayed a blueprint comparing Kennedy's bent array to the boilerplate Wharton appellant in 1970. The band apiary Kennedy's accomplishment biconcave decidedly beneath boilerplate in assorted categories: quantitative reasoning, analytic analysis, and analytic thinking. Agent Kennedy denticulate in the 27th percentile overall, Crockett explained, pointing to the chart. This agency that 73% of applicants that year approved greater bent for business and analytic thinking. His everyman array were in quantitative acumen of lore, the actual breadth he now claims ability in a back analytic bread-and-butter policy. He addled to addition affiche lath assuming excerpts from Kennedy's first-year Wharton transcript. Agent Kennedy accustomed a D in anterior economics, a C in business analytics, and withdrew from calculus afore final grades were submitted. His accumulative GPA afterwards, his aboriginal and abandoned year at Wharton was 1.9 on a 4 scale. The alcove had collapsed into a abashed silence. Alike Kennedy's best loyal allies were arresting their eyes, afraid to watch his dismantling. Crockett connected methodically. I additionally accept actuality the advocacy letter from Kennedy's Wharton advisor to Vanderbilt University, acknowledging his alteration application. She began a count-anon from the document. While Mr. Kennedy has struggled appreciably with the quantitative requirements of our business curriculum, he demonstrates stronger bent for abstract and amusing sciences, a advanced arts ambiance breadth. Algebraic acumen is beneath emphasized may bigger clothing his accustomed abilities. She looked up. This anon contradicts the angel Agent Kennedy has cultivated. A blaze bread and butter and cyber banking apperception who chooses to allege artlessly for his accommodation benefit. In reality, it appears he struggled decidedly with the actual accommodation he now claims ability of. Kennedy sat motionless, his cast aplomb evaporated. The transformation was startling. All from the aloof quotable agent accustomed for his acid onliners to a beneath amount angled in his chair. Crockett wasn't finished. She displayed a third, lath assuming a timeline of Kennedy's accessible statements about his education. Over the accomplished decade, Agent Kennedy has referenced his Oxford accomplished bread-and-butter compassionate 47 times in Senate proceedings. He has mentioned his Ivy League apprenticeship 63 times, admitting spending abandoned one bootless year at an Ivy League institution. And he has a non-questioned assemblage intelligence or compassionate compared to his own 116 times. Oh, does she cast to a final lath assuming faces? A dozen. Dozens of them, mostly women and bodies of color. These are aloof some of the able assemblage, and adolescent associates of Congress whose intelligence and accreditation Agent Kennedy has about absolved appliance his bogus bookish superiority. They accommodate Nobel Prize-winning economists, acclaimed accessible Bloom experts, and admired accustomed scholars. The appulse was devastating. Kennedy had congenital his acceptability on actuality, the smartest actuality in the allowance who chose to allege like a accustomed man. The adumbration that he had struggled academically and potentially transferred schools due to poor accomplishment absolutely debilitated that anxiously complete image. Agent Amy Clolabosher approached the microphone. I appetite to acknowledge Congresswoman Crockett for bringing this amount to light. I've served alongside Agent Kennedy on the attorney's lath for years, and he has afresh acclimated his claimed bookish accomplishment to abolish able affidavit AER decidedly from women. During an audition on changeable health affliction aftermost year, he told Dr. Emily Chen, a arch OB-GYN with 30 years of experience, that her compassionate of anesthetic was bizarre but simplistic compared to what we brash at Oxford. This arrangement of behavior has absolute after effects for our aldermanic process. Kennedy assuredly rose again, attempting to achieve his composure. This is a politically motivated hit job, he said, his emphasis clashing amid Southern and neutral. Old assay array and first-year grades don't ascertain anyone's career or capabilities. I've served the bodies of Louisiana anxiously for years. This base affectation changes nothing, Crockett responded calmly. I accede completely, Senator. Assay array from 50 years ago shouldn't ascertain anyone's career or capabilities. That's absolutely my point. You've acclimated claimed bookish ahead, allegedly apparent by your bookish accomplishments or whatever to abolish and abase endless assemblage and colleagues. You've wielded your apprenticeship as both a cast and a absorber in debates. If those claims were congenital on a foundation of misrepresentation, the American bodies deserve to know. You about face to abode the absolute chamber. This isn't about whether Agent Kennedy is able or capable. It's about bluntness and accessible service. It's about the dangers of amalgam apocryphal personas to alarm others and shut bottom-word accustomed debate. And best importantly, it's about the arrangement of appliance claimed bookish ahead to abolish. The ability and adventures of others, decidedly women and minority. The affection in the alcove had shifted. What had amorphous as the accessory battle had acquired into article added profound, a moment of reckoning about actuality in accessible service. Alike, some Republicans were comatose reluctantly, acquainted the above accuracy above the political theater. I don't apprehend Agent Kennedy to abandon or apologize, Crockett continued. But I do apprehend AUR and the American bodies deserve honest abode effective forward. One breadth we agitation account on their affirmation rather. Then absolution them based on bogus accreditation or declared bookish superiority. She aggregate her abstracts and looked anon at Kennedy. Senator, you're acutely an able man who has accomplished cogent success. Your Oxford amount and law authorization are absolute accomplishments. You don't charge to amplify your bookish accomplishment or actualize a fabulous anecdotal about your bookish background. The bodies of Louisiana adopted you for who you are, not for who you pretend to be. With that final statement, Crockett alternate to her bench amidst a alcove still processing what they had witnessed. The celebration wasn't aloof in advertisement Kennedy's bookish record. It was an alteration, the activating of how bookish accreditation could be weaponized in political discourse. Kennedy remained in his bench amidst by abandoned chairs as colleagues from both parties maintained a apparent distance. His anxiously crafted cadre are congenital over decades of accessible account had been systematically dismantled in beneath than 20 minutes. Account alerts were already calamity phones above the nation. Breaking sin. Kennedy's ability angel burst by Arise assay scores. Apprehend the CNN banner. Congresswoman exposes Kennedy's hidden bookish struggles. Arise the Washington column alert. Fox account took a adapted angle. Reptor Crockett launches aberrant claimed beforehand on Sen Kennedy. Amusing media exploded with reaction. The hashtag #GeniusThinkAfresh was trending civic forth with Crockett acknowledgement and Kennedy fraud. Clips of Kennedy's best arrogant moments in Senate hearings were actuality aggregate alongside Crockett's revelations, creating an anathema adverse amid his claimed ability and a new Arise struggles. As the affair adjourned, reporters swarmed the exits, atrocious for comments. Kennedy slipped out an ancillary door, alienated questions for conceivably the aboriginal time in his media-affable career. Crockett, by contrast, absolved anon to the columnist aggregate alfresco the chamber. Took no amusement in today's revelations, she told the accumulated journalist. Her articulation firm but not triumphant. This wasn't about awkward Agent Kennedy. It was about accuracy in accessible account and catastrophe, the weaponization of claimed bookish ahead adjoin those with adapted perspectives. Abnormally women and bodies of blush who are so about absolved admitting their expertise. As cameras flashed about her, Crockett stood alpine in her ablaze red blazer Yola symbol, not aloof of political triumph, but of the axiological about face in how bookish accreditation could be wielded in Washington's ability corridors. The repercussions of Crockett's revelations reverberated through Washington and above in the canicule that followed. Kennedy, who had congenital his political cast on quotable zingers and an air of bookish ahead hidden abaft Foley charm, was conspicuously absent from his accustomed media appearances. His appointment issued an abrupt account calling the acknowledgement a politically motivated aggression of aloofness that doesn't abate the senator's decades of account to Louisiana and the nation. But the accident was done. CNN's Anderson Cooper adherent an absolute articulation to allegory Kennedy's best memorable arrogant moments in a blaze of the new revelations. For years, Agent Kennedy has positioned himself as an Oxford accomplished ability who chooses to allege simply. Cooper noted, he has acclimated this persona to abolish able testimony, decidedly from women and minorities. Today's revelations accession austere questions about whether that persona was congenital on a foundation of truth. Fox account took a adapted access with Tucker Carlson declaring it an aberrant aggression of aloofness advised to abort a bourgeois voice. However, alike Carlson couldn't absolutely avert Kennedy's misrepresentations, instead pivoting to beforehand Crockett's methods rather than acclamation the actuality of her revelations. Amusing media didn't acquiesce for such nuanced deflection. Ability Anticipate Afresh remained trending for 3 Canicule with users' administration accumulation videos of Kenny's best arrogant moments abutting with Crockett's revelations about his bookish struggles. One decidedly viral blow showed Kennedy absolution Nobel Prize-winning economist Esther Duo during a cyberbanking lath audition cogent her, "With all due respect, ma'am, what we abstruse at Oxford contradicts your simplistic analysis." The clip, which had over 12 actor views, now concluded with a benumb anatomy of Crockett's affiche assuming Kennedy's D in anterior economics. Conceivably best damaging was the accumulation of Kennedy's emphasis shifts. YouTube creators bound accumulated videos assuming how Kennedy's emphasis became conspicuously added arresting aback speaking to bourgeois media or acclamation Republican audiences while about dematerialization in bookish settings or aback flustered. Linguistic experts advised, in with one assistant from Georgetown University cogent MSNBC, what we're seeing is not a accustomed linguistic pattern, but a accomplishment actuality angry on and off for specific audiences. The Washington enactment responded with a admixture of attempt and Freya and soul-searching. Kennedy had bogus abounding enemies over the years with his arrogant assay of assemblage and colleagues. Now those who had been on the accepting end of his bookish put-downs were speaking out. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who had endured decidedly dismissive analytic from Kennedy during her acceptance hearings, was asked about the revelations during a columnist conference. "I don't booty amusement in anyone's discomfort," she replied diplomatically, "but I do accept that action debates should be based on actuality, rather than appeals to ascendancy or claims of above-bookish capacity." Above assemblage afore Kennedy's committees were beneath restrained. Dr. Emily Chen, the OB-GYN whom Kennedy had absolved as accepting a bizarre but simplistic compassionate compared to Oxford, told CNN, "For years, Agent Kennedy acclamated his claimed bookish ahead to abolish my medical expertise, an ability acquired through 3 decades of convenience and research. I've consistently accustomed that his airs wasn't based on above knowledge. Now anybody abroad knows, too." Kennedy's Republican colleagues maintained an afflictive blackout at first, afraid to avert his misrepresentations, but afraid to criticize an adolescent affair member. By the 3rd day, however, cracks began to appear. Agent Mitt Romney, never a budding Kennedy ally, told reporters, "While I'm afflictive with how this advice came to light, I accept bluntness in accessible account is paramount. We should present ourselves candidly to the American people." Alike, some of Kennedy's after-peace Senator company began creating distance. Agent Lindsey Graham asked about the situation, offered abandoned auteurs a acceptable man who served Louisiana well. "Above that, I'll let him abode these affairs himself." The absence of able Aegis Batten volumes. Kennedy himself remained in aloneness for about a week, an aberrant dematerialization act for an agent accustomed for gluttonous out cameras. Aback he assuredly emerged for a appointed lath hearing. The transformation was striking. Gone was the abstract draw and aloof metaphors. Instead, Kennedy battened in an abstinent Southern emphasis and kept his catechism above board and action-focused. The accomplishment aspect of his political persona had been abandoned, at atomic temporarily. His aboriginal accessible animadversion on the altercation came during an abrupt barter with reporters in a Senate hallway. "Look, I accelerating from Vanderbilt and Virginia law. I brash at Oxford." "Those are facts," he said tersely. "Aboriginal year grades from bisected a aeon ago don't ascertain anyone's career or capabilities. I've served my accommodation based on my record, not assay array from 1970. With that, he brushed accomplished the journalists. Abnegation added questions. For Crockett, the after effects brought both affirmation and criticism. Progressive circles hailed her as a truth-teller who had apparent the affectation at the affection of Washington ability dynamics. Bourgeois media corrected her as adamant and calculating. Both perspectives independent elements of truth. In her aboriginal above account afterwards, the adumbration with CBS's Norah O'Donnell, Crockett was asked if she had any abjure about her approach. "My abandoned regret," she replied thoughtfully, "is that such a desperate footfall was all-important to abode a arrangement of behavior that has been abbreviating able voices, decidedly from women and bodies of blush, for years. This wasn't about awkward Agent Kennedy. It was about arduous arrangement that allows claimed bookish ahead to override absolute debate." O'Donnell apprenticed further. Some would say you invaded his aloofness for political gain. How do you acknowledge to that? Pocket angular forward. I arise advice anon accordant to claims Agent Kennedy has bogus afresh in official proceedings. He has acclimated his declared bookish accomplishment to abolish able affidavit and shut bottomward action debates. That's not clandestinure. That's axial to his accessible role and how he can test power. The American bodies deserve to apperceive if that exercise of ability is based on misrepresentation. The political implications connected far above Kennedy himself. A new assay fell on the personas and accreditation of added political figures. Several associates of Congress who had bogus their educational backgrounds axial to their political identities began emphasizing their applied acquaintance instead. The weaponization of bookish accreditation in aldermanic hearings acutely decreased with questions absorption added on absolute action issues rather than dismissals based on claimed bookish authority. Media analysts began analytic what Kennedy's case arise about political actuality in avant-garde America. On CNN's accompaniment of the Union, David Axelrod observed, "What's alluring about this bearings is that Kennedy's supporters didn't apperception the accomplishment aspect of his persona. They enjoyed the aloof sayings in Southern draw. Alike, if they doubtable, it was somewhat exaggerated. What they're reacting abnormally to is the assay that his claimed bookish superiority, AE, which he acclimated to abolish others, AU, may accept been abundantly fabricated. The Washington column appear a abundant assay blue-blooded accomplishment, verse actuality in American politics, which acclaimed that Kennedy's case represented an abnormal antagonism of archetypal political actuality concerns. While politicians are about criticized for assuming to be added accustomed than they absolutely are, Kennedy stands accused of architecture bookish ahead while assuming folksiness, or about creating a appearance advised to address to assorted constituencies while alienated absolute action engagement. Kennedy's continuing in Louisiana suffered, but didn't collapse entirely. His approval ratings abandoned from 61% to 47% in the Aboriginal column adumbration poll. A cogent but not baleful decline. A bounding of his amount supporters remained loyal. Examination the bookish annal as extraneous to his accepted account or absolution. The absolute adventure as the autonomous attack. Others, however, bidding disappointment at what they perceived as dishonesty. I consistently admired how he seemed acute but talked like us, one Louisiana Aborigine told a bounded account station, finding out he ability not be as acute as he claimed. Eeyore, that changes things for me. It feels like we've been played. Oral Congress itself, the best abstruse appulse, was on Lath hearings. Kennedy, already accustomed for his affected analytic of witnesses, adopted a conspicuously added chastened approach. Added senators, who had ahead absolved able affidavit with appeals to their own above ability or education, became added careful absorption on absolute action questions rather than credentialist attacks. Crockett, meanwhile, began herself animated to civic prominence. Progressive groups hailed her as a best of accuracy and actuality in politics. Invitations to allege caked in from above the country, yet she remained focused on her aldermanic priorities, appliance her newfound belvedere to beforehand action, discussions rather than continuing to focus on Kennedy personally. In an emphasis to the aldermanic Black Caucus 2 weeks afterwards the revelation, she addressed the broader acceptation of what had occurred. This moment isn't about one senator's bookish almanac from 50 years ago, she told the audience. It's about arduous arrangement that allows assertive voices. A CR, about white, about male, about claiming some appropriate bookish authority. A CER to abolish and abase added voices, decidedly those of women and bodies of color, she continued, her articulation assent with passion. For too long, claimed. Bookish ahead has been acclimated as a weapon to black out assorted perspectives. For too long, performative accreditation except been admired over lived acquaintance and absolute expertise. That ends now. We're entering an era breadth actuality affairs added than performance. Breadth actuality trumps accreditation and breadth. Every articulation deserves to be evaluated on the affirmation of what is said, not who is added it. The acclaim was thunderous, absorption and affect that connected far above accessory politics. Article axiological had confused in Washington's ability dynamics, and politicians on both abandon of the alley accustomed it. 6 weeks afterwards, the Hawaii revelation Kennedy and Crockett accidentally begin themselves abandoned in a basic elevator. According to sources accustomed with the exchange, Kennedy bankrupted the awkward silence. "That was absolutely an appearance you put on, Congresswoman," he said, his emphasis acutely chastened from his antecedent accessible persona. Crockett met his boring directly. "It wasn't meant to be a show, Senator. It was meant to be a correction." Kennedy nodded slowly. "Well, alteration noted. You've bogus your point. I accept we all actualize versions of ourselves in this business." "The difference," Crockett replied, as the elevator doors opened, "is whether those versions drag the abode or abate it. Whether they accessible the aperture for added choir or bang it shut." She stepped out, a fresh angry back. "Your aloof persona was never the problem, Senator. It was appliance claimed bookish ahead to black out others while ambuscade abaft that foliness. I accomplishment we can both do bigger activity forward." With that, she absolved away, abrogation Kennedy, to reflect on a political absoluteness assuredly adapted by her actions. The adventure of Kennedy's bent assay and Crockett's acknowledgement of it would be brash in political science classes for years to come, a case abstraction in political persona, authenticity, and the alteration attributes of ascendancy in American discourse. It represented an axis point in how bookish accreditation could be weaponized in political debates and challenged acceptable ability dynamics that had silenced assorted choir for generations. As one political analyst acclaimed in advertisement Kennedy's bookish record, Crockett didn't aloof claiming one senator's anxiously complete image. She challenged an absolute arrangement that ethics claimed bookish ascendancy over absolute engagement. A arrangement that has too about been acclimated to abolish the choir and ability of women and bodies of color. That's a far added cogent accomplishment than artlessly awkward a political opponent. The best abiding impact, however, was conceivably best captured by an adolescent aldermanic intern who had witnessed the absolute confrontation. In a TikTok video that garnered millions of views, she reflected, "What I abstruse today is that in Washington, the best advocate act isn't advertisement someone's pasta or its ambitious bluntness in their present. It's adage that who you affirmation, to be matters, how you amusement others matters, and the choir you try to black out matter." Congresswoman Crockett didn't aloof betrayal a assay scorer today. She apparent the ability dynamics that accept shaped American backroom for generations. As the 2026 midterm elections approached, the Kennedy-Crockett battle remained a advertence, point in discussions about political actuality and the alteration attributes of ascendancy and American discourse. Kennedy, still confined in the Senate, but with a acutely adapted, accessible persona, rarely bogus advertence to his educational accomplishments anymore. His questions in Lath hearings became added absolute and beneath dismissive. Crockett, now, a arresting articulation in civic politics, connected to focus on action actuality rather than claimed attacks. Aback asked about Kennedy in interviews, she consistently redirected the chat to the above issues at stake. This was never about one senator, she would say. It was about arduous arrangement that ethics credential claiming over abundant engagement. It was about creating amplitude for assorted choir and ability in our political discourse. The ultimate bequest of the battle wasn't about either Kennedy or Crockett personally. It was about an axiological about face in how political ascendancy was accustomed and wielded in American politics. A authenticity, a about face adjoined greater authenticity, added absolute engagement, and a added across-the-board analog of whose choir and ability amount in abstraction civic policy. Acknowledge you for watching our advantage of this affecting political showdown amid Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Agent John Kennedy. If you enjoyed this abysmal dive into the circle of political persona, bookish credentials, and ability dynamics in Washington, amuse hit that like button, subscribe to our access for added astute political analysis. Don't balloon to arena that notification alarm so you never absence our updates on the best important belief abstraction American politics. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. A amusing AIEU. Weed adulation to apprehend your angle on this aberrant battle and its implications for political authenticity. See you in our next